Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another dungeon guide for instances within the world of Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn with myself, Meoni. Today we look at the level 23 to 25 dungeon, the 1000 Maws of Toto-Rak. This instance will take you 20 to 25 minutes depending on your group. Once you are level 23, you may visit the entrance of Toto-Rak to be able to enter this dungeon. Toto-Rak is located in the South Shroud, northeast from Buscaron's Drubbers, and southeast from Gridania, the Blue Badger Gate. It is extremely important to note that in the 1000 Maws of Toto-Rak there are various kinds of enemies that you will face. There's a large variety of them, and packs composed of several of these particular types, and those are Pteroks, which are dragons that fear Pteroks, which are dragons that breathe cone-based fire attacks, Muntui saplings, and Might Traps, which are ranged enemies that stay in place. They have some knockback abilities as well. Elementals that deal lightning damage to you, and indeed on the floor in red circles. Puddings, gels, and flans, which deal poison attacks, which obviously will have to Asuna off. Or Sticky Web. When you notice a web-covered arch, these webs will suck players near it, push them forwards, and create a barrier to close off those who have not been separated. Players can destroy the web by attacking them from both sides, but this can indeed strand you on the side with a load of mobs. So obviously you want to take this down as fast as possible to reunite the group in one team, otherwise the healer will be separated from the rest of the group and you will likely die. Fleshy pods are also another enemy which you don't want to go near of. When damaged even the slightest bit, these explode for a massive AoE damage and indeed apply a dot. So you want to eliminate these from afar and make sure you're not near them when you do so. This particular dungeon, like the rest, does have key requirements to unlock certain areas of the dungeon, so you want to make sure you clear out the majority of the rooms, and it may be in your best interest anyway, since most of the rooms contain treasure chests which have a chance of dropping some particularly good loot and quite a lot of gil. So once you go through this, there really isn't any other things to focus on here other than Magitech photo cells, which are the keys that I am talking about, which you will be needing to collect to be able to progress through the rest of the dungeon. So with that said and the trash covered, let's look at the actual bosses and the tactics herein. The 1000 Maws of Toto-Rak contains 3 bosses. The first 2 bosses are the same boss essentially, but with different mechanics. This first boss is the Cowl of 9 Tails. On this first encounter with the Cowl, the fight is fairly straightforward and tank and spank. Just defeat it as fast as you can. Make sure to use your DPS limit break, as the gauge will be sure to fill before you reach the final boss when you will need it again. It was quite disappointing, that first fight with the Cowl of 9 Tails. I felt it was a bit of a step back in regards to progression of bosses within the game, but nevertheless, this second boss is a second bout with the Cowl of 9 Tails, his second encounter with him, and the changes to this fight are very small. About 50% health through the boss, he will spawn an ad known as a Warden's Whip. From my experience, it's best to take down the Warden's Whip before we go back on the Cowl, because it can potentially spawn more than one during the fight, which will obviously put more stress on the tank and healer. Apart from that, there really isn't much to think about. There is a particularly nasty AoE poison move that he will put on the floor. Simply don't stand in the red circle and you will be fine. Even if you do get the poison on you, it can be easily Asuna'd off and indeed healed through, even if you don't wish to cleanse it off. The boss shouldn't pose any threat to even an average party. So let's move on to the third and final boss of this instance, which is actually more like a boss. Thank goodness for that. And that is Grafless. Grafless is the first boss, which is fairly tricky to beat in an uncoordinated party, unless you know specifically the mechanics therein. So the first mechanic is, upon entering Grafless's chamber, he will be surrounded by fleshy pods. Make sure the DPS dispatches them immediately, and Grafless will later use them by pushing your tank towards them, so focus down the fleshy pods and kill them as soon as the fight comes. The other ability is Sticky Web ability. Periodically throughout the fight, Grafless will cast this ability, which will spawn a sticky pod on one of your party members' feet. Be conscious of this and stay clear to destroy the pod from a safe distance. Make sure that you are nowhere near it when you do, otherwise you will probably lose half your HP pool and have the horrible poison debuff on you, which your healer will not be happy with you for acquiring. There are also ads which are called the Kozamites, which is spawned about 60 to 70% health of Grafless. He will spawn 2 of these Kozamites. It is important to defeat them them before focusing on the boss again. If your party does have a thaumaturge, have them cast sleep on one of the Kozamites to make the encounter much easier. This is definitely a tip I would use. This fight is particularly tricky, especially with a pug group, but even with a coordinated group it doesn't make sense to not make use of the abilities on hand. The fourth and final ability is losing skin. At roughly 50% health, Grafless will lose his skin and in effect expose his tail. This will add a new mechanic to the fight. Where the tail lays down, AoE poison marked by a green circle will appear. Stay away from this area at all costs. It deals massive damage. Your goal at this point is to target the tail and the poison circles will stop. Make sure you defeat the tail and then focus your full efforts on the boss to defeat it. So at this phase you obviously want to be at the side of the boss where obviously you don't have the cleave from the front and indeed you don't have the poison from the back if you are melee, and you should have no real problems. An uncoordinated group can kill this if you point out the base mechanics, and indeed if you have watched this video you should have no problem with it at all. And that's the point. If you have liked this video, leave a like below if you found it of some use. If you have comments of further additions or extra things that you want to add, or things like requests for other things that you want to see in the future from Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn from me, Meoni, be sure to leave that below. Thank you very much for watching my video, and I will indeed see you next time.